Hey y'all, this is the second time I'm recording this. Naked truth. Um, hey y'all, it's me, Jazz, and I am back as your host for this episode of the Potter's Clay podcast. Today is April 16th, so we're not quite shy of 2 weeks away from Resurrection Sunday, and it had been sitting on my heart to talk about it. So here we are. Um, in my doom scrolling over the past week, I came across a video that inspired this. This is going to be a three-part series. I know that's different, but we're here for it. Um, Talking about the 3 days. Friday, the Good Friday, the burial, Saturday, the period of waiting, and Sunday, the resurrection. Anywho, I came across a TikTok video that was talking about how a lot of us will celebrate and live and pray for the resurrection in our own lives, right? But don't want to have to go through the burial. And that really spoke to me. So it inspired this series. It was this man who was also on a podcast. It was a clip of it. So if you ever see this in your life, props to you. Thank you, dude. So yeah. So I feel like it's important to just touch on this, right? Last week, well, actually 2 Sundays ago, was Resurrection Sunday, and of course we all come together and we celebrate the fact that Jesus rose. But before that, I feel like it's important to acknowledge the betrayal, the suffering, the sacrifice, and the burial that had to happen in order for the promise to be fulfilled. And I'm not just talking physical burial, right? But the period of waiting, the silence that was endured, and the fact that it really looked like that the promise had failed to everybody else. It looked like this man was sent down here and everything they said about him was right. Just going through that season. We're going to get into it over the next 3 episodes. So yeah, lately I've been sitting with the idea that nobody really talks about the burial, but everybody wants to celebrate the blessing and the resurrection, the glow up, breaking through, breaking down, right? But what about the part where things feel dead? When things in your life feel dead, your ambition is dead, your motivation is dead, your discipline is dead. What about that season? When it looks like the dreams and the promises have failed. Nobody really dives into that enough for me. And I feel like that's one of the realest parts. So, your girl has stepped into that for everybody. I know. You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, I just feel like that's the part where we're all confused and uncomfortable and honestly just questioning everything, questioning God and was this really my purpose? Did I make the wrong decision? Just full of doubt and confusion and yeah, doubt and confusion, right? So let's dive into that because that's so real. At least for me, I know it is. That's so real. Um, so the title of this episode is The Friday Feelings. And I hope you have your seatbelt buckled up because this is gonna be a ride. It's gonna be a ride. Um, so everybody wants to talk about this blessing, but nobody wants to talk about Friday. They'll talk about Friday as, don't get me wrong, people talk about the crucifixion, right? But I feel like it's to give context to the resurrection. I want to give the crucifixion just as much power as the resurrection has because it was necessary to fulfill the promise, and there's going to be burials in our life that are necessary in order to fulfill our promise. So it's important that we emphasize this, right? And I feel like Friday emphasized the fact that obedience is going to cost you something. It is not going to be sunshine and rainbows. God did not send a private jet down to come pick Jesus up and he sat first class on his way back up to heaven. That's not what happened. And I feel like it's extremely unrealistic of us to not think that we're going to have to bury and go through some trials and go through some sacrifices in our life as well. So instead of loathing it or avoiding it, let's embrace it. Let's embrace it. Let's embrace the sacrifices he went through as it gives us strength to go through the sacrifices that we are going to have to make. Um so I wanted to tie in a couple points of scripture that I feel like emphasize some of the things that we may experience on earth when it comes to people. When it comes to people and the way that they may treat us. So I read this story of Good Friday. Um, I read Mark 15 and I read Luke 23 in preparation for this. And a couple of different verses stood out to me. The first one being Mark 15 and 3. Oop, I went to Mark 3. Forgive me. Dyslexic. Mark 15 and 3. And it reads, "And the chief priest accused him of many things, but he answered nothing." We all get accused of plenty of stuff. I feel like especially in high school. Maybe that's just because that's the most recent social group I've been forced into in my life. But I feel like we all go through a period where we're accused of things um that either aren't true at all or are incomplete, missing some parts of the story. And it definitely, at least for me, has forced me to respond in ways that weren't my best moment. Um And I feel like it's important to acknowledge they said, and he answered nothing. This man is literally about to get killed, about to get hung up, mocked, and killed by people. And they're accusing him of these things. And he didn't defend himself at all. At all. Which speaks to me. I feel a little convicted by that. But yeah, Jesus was getting accused by people left and right of things that was not true. And we all go through those things as well. In Mark 15:14, it also reads, "Then Pilate said unto them, Why, what evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him." I feel like a lot of us also go through things where we are faced with what we may deem as a consequence or a punishment without a valid reason or explanation. They're yelling out, "Crucify him," and he's saying, why? For what reason? What has this man done to y'all? And they can't give any reasoning except for the fact that they just want him crucified. I feel like, at least in my own life, I can relate this to relationships that have ended and without closure, without any reasoning as to what justifies the way that you're handling this situation, what justifies the way that you're treating me, um what justifies the fact that I'm getting treated like this even though other people in your life may not be, maybe treated more gracefully, um I feel like there's many times in my life where I've come to the feeling of being punished without having a explanation or justification or even just a, why I find myself asking why a lot to the way that people treat me. Why do they do the things that they do? um and Jesus went through that too on the same day. In Mark 15:29 through 32, it reads, "And they that passed by railed on him, wagging their heads and saying, Ah, thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself and come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests, mocking, said among themselves with the scribes, He save others, himself he cannot save. Let Christ the King of Israel descend now from the cross, that we may see and believe. And they that were crucified with him reviled him." Reviled him. I don't know. Just being mocked and doubted by people for the calling that you may be stepping into or the dreams that and aspirations you may have. I feel like a lot of us especially feel that, like when people feel like the things that we may want to pursue seem unrealistic to them and their expectations. Um we can face mocking and people doubting us openly to our face. In Mark 15:39, it also reads, excuse me. "And when the centurion which stood over against him saw that he so cried out and gave up the ghost, he said, Truly, this man was the Son of God." I feel like it's important to recognize that we are also going to have people who they laugh and mock us, right? When our dreams seem unrealistic, but then when they begin to see a promise becoming fulfilled, they hop on the bandwagon. And even though they might not have stepped in and defended us and had enough faith in us when people were mocking and doubting us, I feel like it's important to acknowledge the fact that there are going to be people that hop back on. And that also is something we all go through that can be extremely frustrating. So I just wanted to emphasize some different things that stood out to me on Good Friday that Jesus went through, that we all may be going through. Get my notes back here, y'all. So Jesus was going through betrayal, pain. He even had to carry his own cross. Like, let's just sit with that for a second. You had to carry your own death on your back, basically. Like, I always think about that when I watch like movies and stuff, like, or when I think about stuff like people with illnesses, like knowing that they're going to die. Like, but this man was literally basically carrying the knife that was gonna get stabbed in his back. You know, like that's deep. Um, but yet he still chose obedience despite knowing the outcome. So I feel like there's some different connections we can choose here, right? So, excuse me. So Jesus was betrayed, endured extreme suffering, and carried his own cross. And if we swing over to Isaiah 53 and 3, it reads, He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Um, while I was reading that, this is such a sidebar, but I feel like it's so crazy that the man who is described as the Prince of Peace was also in this verse described as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. For our sake, by the way. That's crazy. Um, just to emphasize the fact though of what he had to endure, he was despised and rejected of men for something that he wasn't even that they assume that they came up with. A lot of us will go through things like that, and I feel like it's important to use Jesus as a model for how he was able to handle those things. Um, but he chose obedience even without knowing the outcome. And I feel like this can be seen as like having to walk away from people you love but know aren't in alignment with you. Um the people that you may feel so dependent on, the people that you may, have spent all these years with, the people that you grew up with, the people, all these things. I feel like it's important to um this may be like a crazy relation, but Jesus had to walk away from everybody on earth, right? His parents, his disciples, everybody, the community that he had here on earth, he had to walk away from them. And I'm sure that he loved them. I know that he loved them, right? But not to say they weren't in alignment with him spiritually, but in order to complete his assignment and step into his calling, he had to leave those people behind. Okay? And there may be a time in your life where you have to walk away from people. You have to walk away from relationships, even though you might love them with every ounce of love that's in your heart. We have to be able to acknowledge what our assignments is and what God is calling us to do, and be able to audit whether these people are in alignment with that. No matter how good of a person are, no matter how much you love them, that alignment piece is so important. um Choosing growth over comfort in Luke 22:42. We're swinging back on the Luke in the back of the Bible. This 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 makes me okay. Doubt was a tricky subject for me because I feel like it's okay to have doubts as long as you come to God for confirmation. And in Luke 22:42, it reads, saying, this is Jesus talking, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. He acknowledged, like, God, I don't want to have to be the one to fulfill it. Not that he didn't want to, but all the pain and suffering and things that he was going through, he was basically saying, like, is there anybody else? Is this really my calling? Is this really me that has to do this? Because if there's anybody else, give them this cup to drink from. But whatever your will is, if I'm the one who has to fulfill that thing, let your will be done. So I feel like this emphasizes the fact that it's okay to come to God with doubts, but as long as we are secure in his plan and his promise he has for us. But anywho, I feel like this emphasizes choosing growth over comfort. in the days where it feels like you're carrying your own cross and death is just around the corner, being able to acknowledge that choosing God's path is going to be way better for us, even through the trials and the tribulations, than choosing the path of comfort or convenience. Um, and doing the right thing, even when you feel like you're losing, I feel like that tugs at a lot of people's pride. Um, Especially with like exposure culture. Y'all, I'm really about to delete Facebook because every time I get on there, it's a mess. It's a mess that is kind of just like draining to even see. Exposure culture is such a thing that has taken over society. And that's what this made me think of. Like, even though it feels like you're losing, even though somebody might embarrass you on social media and you got these screenshots and you got these pictures and you got all these things that could like ruin their life essentially, doing the right thing, even though it might seem like you losing, even though it might seem like to everybody else you being scary and you being this and you being that, doing the right thing. Like Jesus, like when they were up here, like he had all power in his hands, okay? Like that man could have got up off the cross at any moment if he wanted to, and he, like, like he just had all power in his hands. And everybody was up there mocking him, making fun of him. Like, if you're God and if you can do all this and you can do that, then why don't you just do this? And even though it might have felt like he was losing up there, he stood firm in his calling and in his assignment and in his faith to ensure that the promise was fulfilled. So obedience isn't always rewarded immediately. And I feel like that emphasizes that doing what's right can feel like everything is falling apart. And this is emphasized to me in Hebrews 12:11, which we're gonna swing to the back some more, past Luke. And 12:11 reads, Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. So even though it may feel like your burial that day, when you're getting exposed or you're getting embarrassed or all of these things, you feel like you're losing. This verse just gives so much life to that. Like, the present may not seem like you're going to make it. The present may not seem like you're going to resurrect, right? The present may not seem like God is going to make a way for you out of no way like he did for Jesus. But it says afterward it yielded the peaceable fruit. Imagine hearing a verse that's telling you after you're going through the death and the worst days and the worst times, that afterwards, if you just hold on, you're going to get the peaceable fruit of righteousness. How empowering is that? That's so good. So, to emphasize, like, that's a test of faith, right? When God is doing those things, seeing if you're going to do what's right, even when it feels like you're losing, acknowledging the fact that obedience isn't rewarded immediately all the time, that is to test your faith. That is not, like, if everything gave you a reward right away, then everybody would do it. Like, there would be no character build, there would be no discipline, there would be no faith in God, no dependency on him. Um so this can be seen as like walking away from relationships or environments that you may have these connections to, or you may have these relationships with people, walking away from those and not knowing what the next step may look like. Um that's what he's calling for you to do. So we may struggle relating sacrifice is failure a lot of the times. Um, but that's just a misunderstanding. That's just a misunderstanding. And I feel like it can really be shown in the burial, the burial of God. Like, everybody thought that this was the end. People thought, I mean, just imagine if you met this man and you were his disciple and he was doing miracles and you've seen these things with your own eyes. There's no way that I would feel like I'm going to see him get up there on that cross and just let everybody make fun of him. Like, get up, show them the truth. And once they buried that man and he had to go through that burial and all those terrible things in order to fulfill the promise, everybody probably thought that he lost and everybody's faith probably wavered and took it as a failure, but it was a sacrifice to get to the bigger picture. And I want to say that to encourage you, don't become discouraged in the Friday. Don't become discouraged in what seems like you're failing and what seems like you're losing, and when you're being mocked and when you're being doubted and when you're being accused and when you're being punished. Don't become discouraged in that, because after every burial, there may be a season of silence and waiting, but the resurrection is right around the corner. I feel like it's important to acknowledge that obedience may seem extremely expensive and your pockets may be real. You might feel like they real empty, but that's dependent on what you value. Obedience might seem extremely expensive, but that's all depending on what you place your value in. And that's heavy. That's heavy. But to break it down even more, obedience may seem expensive when your value is in money and God is calling you to leave that job. And you may not have another job lined up, but God is calling you to leave that job. So obedience might seem real expensive then, right? Obedience may seem extremely expensive when you've been with this partner for the past 15 years of your life. And God is calling you to leave. God is telling you you need to leave. This is not what I have for you. The cycle that you've been going through is due to your decisions, and I'm calling you to leave. Obedience is going to seem real expensive when you put your value into that relationship, right? So obedience is not going to seem as expensive when you place your value in your calling, your assignment, when you place your value in being obedient, right? And I feel like that calls for you to do a little audit. Like, in what areas of your life do obedience seem most expensive, and why is that? Um, so we pray for growth, but we often pray for growth in the forms that we want it, right? Not acknowledging that sometimes growth means removal. And there's I had a women's conference last year and they talked about pruning. And pruning is basically it's for plants, but I looked it up, but it's the selective removal to improve health, structure and yield by removing what's dead. Growth means removal. In order for plants to grow, we must weed out the garden, right? We must cut off the dead leaves in order to stop it from invading the growth, right? And pushing out all things that are healthy. Um and that's not easy. That's not easy, but it's necessary for growth. Um, if it hurts, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're off track. You just might be in your Friday. And I also thought about, in order to like build and to grow, it reminded me of like a house that on the Friday, it may seem abandoned. It may have been up for auction. You might have bought that house for $5. Okay. And on the Saturday, it's going through the demolition process and the renovation process. And on the Sunday, it's restored. And when you bought that house on Friday, everybody was probably looking at that beat up abandoned house like, what are you going to possibly do with that? But I feel like it's important to acknowledge that before you got to the restoration of the home, you had to go through demolition and renovation. Friday is about the demolition. Friday is about the pruning. Friday is about the removal and the burial. Friday is about the accusations, the mocking, all of these things that you have to endure. It's okay. You're not the only one. It's normal. Have faith and stand firm in your obedience. I'm going to emphasize again, if it hurts, it doesn't necessarily mean you're off track. You might just be in your Friday. Maybe it's not falling apart, but just like that house, maybe you're being stripped down so something stronger can be built. And I pray that you find peace in that. I pray that you find strength in that. I'm speaking this life over myself as well. Um it's not easy, especially in the society that we have. It's not easy to endure these things, and it's very easy to get caught up in the fact that it might be the end all be all, but it's not. Just like Jesus on that cross was not the end all be all, it is not for you. And I just pray that you find courage and you find strength in that, because after Friday comes Saturday, and Saturday might seem even worse because you might not hear a peep for a minute. You might not see movement for a minute. But just have faith in the fact that Friday is coming. And I pray that over each and every one of y'all. So I'm looking forward to seeing y'all for Saturday. Um, the silence and the waiting day. So then we can get to Sunday, Resurrection Day. So yeah, looking forward to seeing y'all. I pray that y'all have a good rest of y'all day, a good rest of y'all week. I pray reflection, I pray rejuvenation and renewal over each and every one of y'all. And I will see y'all back on my next episode of the Potter's Clay podcast. Bye.